I had just finished a long day at work and was looking forward to a quiet meal at a well-known upscale restaurant in the city. It wasn't my usual spot, but I had heard good things. Walking in, the sleek decor and low lighting gave the place an air of sophistication. I was immediately greeted by a young hostess who led me to my table. The atmosphere was perfect, calm and serene, a stark contrast to the chaotic day I'd left behind. After I settled in, a server brought me a menu and a glass of water. Everything was moving smoothly until a man, clearly in his 50s, with an expression that suggested he thought he owned the world, walked into the restaurant. He didn't look like someone I'd expect to be dining here, his demeanor more casual than the patrons around him. He was wearing a sports jacket, not quite the kind of attire one would expect for this kind of place, but it wasn't an issue. However, things took a turn when he saw me sitting alone at my table. I could feel his eyes burning into the back of my neck, and I didn't think much of it at first. I figured maybe I was being paranoid. But then he approached my table, standing with an air of entitlement that made the air feel a little thicker. "You're sitting at the wrong table," he said flatly, his voice dripping with condescension. I stared at him, confused. "Excuse me?" "This table is for customers who actually matter," he said, a smirk playing on his lips. "You're gonna have to leave." I was taken aback. "What do you mean?" "I've been seated here by the hostess." He didn't respond right away but just stared at me, almost as if daring me to challenge him. I could feel my heart rate spike. I knew this was not a situation I should escalate, but something inside me snapped. His words hung in the air, heavy with a sense of authority he believed he had over the space. For a moment, I thought maybe I should just let it slide. After all, it was just a table, right? But then I remembered the long hours I'd worked, the effort I had put into my career, and the fact that I didn't owe anyone anything. I stood up slowly, forcing myself to meet his eyes. "I'm not going anywhere." He sneered at me, unimpressed by my defiance. "You don't get it, do you? You're causing a scene. You think people like you should be sitting here, in a place like this?" His words felt like an insult, and I couldn't help but feel the sting, though I did my best not to show it. "I'm just here to enjoy my meal, just like anyone else," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But he wasn't having it. He crossed his arms and leaned forward, his face twisted with a mix of disgust and disdain. "You don't belong here. This is a place for people who know how to act." I felt the anger rising in me, but I held it in check. I wanted to handle this with grace, but every word he spoke was pushing me closer to the edge. Without another word, I stood up and gathered my things, preparing to leave, but I wasn't about to let him win this easily. I walked toward the hostess station, asking quietly if I could speak to the manager. The hostess gave me an apologetic look but promised to bring someone over. As I waited, the man was still sitting there, watching me, his eyes never leaving my figure. I could feel his smugness from across the room, and it only made me more determined. The minutes stretched by, each one thicker than the last. The manager, a middle-aged woman with sharp features, finally came over, her heels clicking against the floor as she approached. She offered a forced smile, but I could tell she was uncomfortable. "What seems to be the issue?" she asked, trying to sound neutral, though the tension was palpable. I took a deep breath and explained the situation, detailing how the man had ordered me to leave simply because of his apparent belief that I didn't belong in the restaurant. The manager's expression shifted, a flicker of disbelief crossing her face. She looked over at the man, still sitting with his smug grin, and I noticed her hesitation. It was as if she was weighing something, trying to decide if she should intervene or let this play out. "I'll take care of this," she said after a beat, her voice more firm than before. The manager walked toward the man, her posture tense. I watched as she leaned in to speak with him, and for the first time, he looked slightly rattled. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could see his face shift from confidence to irritation. His shoulders were tense, and his hand gripped the edge of the table like he was bracing himself for something. A few moments later, the manager came back to me, her face pale but resolute. I'm terribly sorry for what just happened. I've spoken with him, and we're asking him to leave immediately. A sense of relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. I hadn't expected this to be over so easily. I nodded, but just before I turned to sit back down, I saw the man stand abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. His expression was no longer one of superiority, it was one of fury. He shot me one last glare, and as he walked out, I heard him mutter under his breath, "This isn't over." I didn't care. My meal was still waiting for me, and I refused to let his behavior ruin my evening. But little did I know, that wasn't the end of this at all. I returned to my seat, trying to shake off the unease that lingered after the confrontation. The manager was back to her station, but there was something in the air, an underlying tension that made the restaurant feel even quieter than before. I had just sat down when the hostess returned with a sad smile. Ma'am. I hate to bother you again, but the manager has asked me to let you know something. I raised an eyebrow. What is it? Sorry to tell you this, but the restaurant has made the decision to close for the night. We're asking all remaining customers to leave. My stomach dropped. What? Why? I looked around at the nearly empty restaurant. Everything seemed normal, except for the empty seat at the table I had just vacated. The hostess looked uncomfortable. There was an incident, and we've been asked to close early. She paused, then lowered her voice. The man who caused the issue earlier, well, he's an important regular here. I don't know the details, but we've been instructed to close. I stood up, confused and frustrated. Wait, you're telling me that after everything, the restaurant is closing because of him? The hostess nodded, her eyes darting nervously. I felt a rush of anger, but before I could say anything else, the manager came over, her face pale but with a look of resolve. I know this doesn't make sense, but please understand that we had no choice. I'm terribly sorry, but I'm afraid you'll need to leave now. The reality of the situation hit me then. I wasn't just being dismissed from my table, I was being kicked out entirely, all because of one entitled man. I stood there for a moment, stunned. The idea that the entire restaurant would close over one incident felt surreal. It wasn't just about the table anymore, it was about power, control, and who really had the final say in this place. The anger bubbled up inside me again, but this time, I wasn't going to let it go. I knew I couldn't just walk away. I understand, I said slowly, my voice steady but my fists clenched at my sides. But I'll be damned if I'm going to just leave quietly. The manager looked uncomfortable, but she said nothing, her eyes cast downward as if waiting for me to walk out the door. But that wasn't happening. Without another word, I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. I opened my laptop, logged into the restaurant's official page, and began typing a review. I made sure to mention every detail, the rude man, the manager's hesitance, and the fact that I was being forced out because of someone's arbitrary sense of superiority. Then, I clicked post. And just like that, my review went live. I could feel a shift in the atmosphere. The hostess looked at me, her face pale, and for the first time, I noticed a subtle tension in the air. It wasn't just a review, it was a message. Within minutes, I received an email notification. It was from the restaurant's management team. They were apologizing profusely, offering me a private dinner for two as an apology and asking me to come back for a meeting with the owner to resolve the matter. But it didn't stop there. As I scrolled through social media, I saw the story had already gained traction. People were sharing their experiences with the restaurant, some praising the way I'd handled the situation, others furious at the unfair treatment I'd endured. It wasn't just my review anymore, it was a full-blown social media firestorm. The comments flooded in, and within minutes, the restaurant's page was bombarded with criticism. The story of the entitled man and the closing of the restaurant spread like wildfire. And that's when the calls started coming in, from news outlets, from customers, from people who were outraged. The restaurant, trying to maintain its reputation, realized that they were facing an uphill battle. The man had no idea what he had unleashed. And neither did I. The following 7 minutes felt like a blur. As I sat there, glued to my phone, the notifications kept coming in, tweets, comments, messages, each one more furious than the last. It wasn't just a matter of a bad review anymore, this had become something bigger. Something the restaurant couldn't easily control. The tension in the air was suffocating. I could see the manager whispering into her phone, likely trying to calm down the escalating situation. But it was too late for that. The damage had already been done. It wasn't just a rude encounter anymore, it was a story of an establishment that allowed its customers to be mistreated, its staff too afraid to stand up for what was right. And then, just as I thought things couldn't get worse for the restaurant, the doors opened. A group of uniformed officers walked in, followed by a couple of reporters with cameras. The tension in the restaurant skyrocketed as they moved to the back office, their presence making it clear that things had escalated far beyond anything the manager could have anticipated. The manager came over to me, her face pale. We need you to leave now," she said, almost in a whisper. I wasn't surprised by the request, but I wasn't about to go quietly. "Why don't you tell the people outside what happened here?" I said, my voice sharp. "Tell them how you kicked me out and shut the place down just because some guy thought he could bully me." Her eyes widened, but she said nothing. She just stood there, frozen. The weight of the situation was now too heavy for her to ignore. As I walked out of the restaurant, I could hear the murmurs of the crowd outside, the ones who had been drawn in by the social media storm. There were people taking photos, and news outlets were beginning to gather. I saw a couple of reporters snapping shots, their phones raised in the air, capturing every angle of the story. The man who had started all of this, the one who thought he could control the situation, wasn't there anymore. But his presence lingered. The restaurant was now at the center of a controversy it couldn't escape. And as I stepped out into the cool evening air, I realized one thing: sometimes, standing up for yourself was the only thing that could turn the tide. 7 minutes. That was all it took for the entire restaurant to go from an upscale, exclusive dining experience to a place that would be remembered for all the wrong reasons. The next few days were a whirlwind. My phone didn't stop ringing. Messages flooded in from friends, family, and even strangers, all praising my decision to speak out. Some were amazed that one person could bring down an entire restaurant chain, but I wasn't basking in glory. It wasn't about me, it was about what that restaurant represented. The arrogance, the entitlement, and the lack of accountability. But then came the phone call I wasn't expecting, an offer from the restaurant owner himself. His voice was polite but strained, apologetic but with a hint of desperation. "We would like to offer you a personal apology," he said, his tone carefully measured. "We acknowledge that the incident was handled poorly, and we're willing to meet to discuss how we can make things right. We value our customers, and we regret the events that transpired." I didn't hesitate. "I'm listening." They wanted to make amends, to offer me something, but it wasn't about the apology anymore. It wasn't about the free meals or the compensation. It was about a larger conversation. One where people understood that standing up for what's right wasn't just a personal victory, it was a societal one. I agreed to meet with the owner, but not to discuss a free dinner. I told him I wanted the restaurant's policies changed. I wanted them to understand that what happened wasn't just about one table or one man. It was about how they treated everyone, no matter who they were or how they appeared. When I walked into the meeting a few days later, the owner was waiting for me in a posh office above the restaurant. He was clearly uncomfortable, shifting in his seat as we spoke. I told him what I'd learned over the past few days, how power dynamics could be so easily manipulated, how the fear of losing patrons could override doing the right thing. And how a few wrong decisions could lead to a much bigger problem. "I understand," he said, his voice softer now. "We've learned a hard lesson." And that's when I realized something: while I had fought for my dignity, this situation had gone beyond me. It was about everyone who had ever been underestimated, ignored, or silenced. In that moment, I didn't just shut down a restaurant, I had made them rethink their entire approach to how they treated people. A week later, the restaurant made a public statement acknowledging their mistakes and outlining the steps they were taking to ensure that something like this never happened again. They apologized for their handling of the incident and promised to implement new policies regarding customer treatment and staff empowerment. They were also pledging to donate a portion of their profits to organizations focused on equality and inclusion. The shift in tone was palpable, and while some people were skeptical, I knew that the real victory wasn't just in the apology, it was in the change that was set into motion. As for me, I didn't feel a sense of triumph, not in the way I had expected. I wasn't celebrating the closure of the restaurant, nor did I take satisfaction in watching their public image burn. What mattered more to me was that I had stood my ground. I had refused to be pushed aside, to be silenced, and in doing so, I had sparked a conversation, one that reached far beyond the walls of that restaurant. The next time I walked into a restaurant, I did so with my head held high, knowing that no matter the setting, I belonged there. I knew that when faced with injustice, I had the power to change the narrative. And I realized, as I looked at the social media posts still circulating about the incident, that this wasn't just about one restaurant or one man. It was about how we all have the ability to make a difference. One small act of standing up for yourself can lead to a ripple effect, a shift that, over time, can change the way people think, act, and treat one another. The restaurant had closed that night, but in the end, I had closed the door on a much bigger issue. The impact of that one night would echo for far longer than any meal ever could.